Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our third of five sessions for a program on vaccines reconsidered, as we essentially have a retrospective on the pandemic and the issues that emerged, not only for the United States, but for the entire world around healthcare and what measures are appropriate by government agencies and major corporations to take in the face of a health emergency such as we experienced during uh, COVID. As we begin today, I want to just note that this is our third day and we're still on air. As I've said over the last 2 days, this program would not have been possible 2 years ago because any public discussion of the pandemic or the vaccines in particular was judged by the government, not only in the United States, but around the world, and the major social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Google, etc., as essentially illegal, and people could be taken down. Humanity Rising received a couple of black marks as we got as close as we could to this issue. We had Robert Kennedy on in the early days and various doctors. And I wanted to express appreciation to President Donald Trump for making this possible and for nominating Robert Kennedy Jr. as the new Secretary of Health and Human Services and other individuals that are being confirmed as we speak this week for other major positions in the US government, with a mandate to look seriously at why it is that the American public has the worst health of any country in the world. And what are the factors that go into it and how we can make America healthy again. I wanted to be a little explicit about thanking Donald Trump because I know that creates cognitive dissonance. Many of us progressives have considered Donald Trump to be the antithesis of everything we stand for, and to a large degree, that's true. But I want to just remind us all of something that Ken Wilber, the great integral philosopher, has said. And that is, he says, no one is right all the time, and no one is wrong all the time. So to appreciate who something or uh, what something really is, or who someone really is, we have to move beyond our categories of left and right and good and evil and really take in the actual experience in and of itself. I watched the State of the Union address by President Trump last night, and many things I strongly disagree with. And I found myself agreeing with what he was saying about making America healthy again and several other issues. And I realized that one of the challenges of our time is to leave behind the ideological boxes of Democrat and Republican, to take the case of the United States, but the socialists and the conservatives in Europe and all of our categories, because they're all being rent asunder by the complexity of a hyper-complex world. And that leads me to the second point I want to make, that in this world of ours, the protection of democratic freedoms is now becoming paramount. And what we've seen over the last 4 years with regards to American healthcare is a collusion between government and corporate interests that the framers of our Constitution didn't even think about when they wrote the Bill of Rights, asserting that the government cannot abridge free speech, for example, the right to assembly. Never dreamed in the late 18th century by our founding fathers that the government would circumvent this by getting the corporations to do it. So as we contemplate democratic principles in relationship to healthcare, as we contemplate what does informed consent mean in a world in which we're all on social media, and the corporations are not included in our constitutional protections. This raises serious questions and also challenges for the preservation of democracy as we move into a world in which the corporate sector is bigger than governments and stronger than governments. So thank you, everyone, for joining us here on Humanity Rising as we contemplate the vast impact of the pandemic between 2020 and essentially 2023. In this spirit, I want to welcome our speaker for today, Jeffery Jaxen, who's a veteran investigative journalist of some renown, who has been investigating, along with many other people, the true realities of the pandemic, and has been deeply involved in the Informed Consent Action Network, and investigates not only health-related issues, but all kinds of issues that, in his judgment, need to see more light so that the public can be better informed. Because only a well-informed public can make democracy as strong as it needs to be to counter those forces in government, in the corporate sector, that don't want us to have the information to exercise informed consent. That's the anvil for democracy in what the pandemic represents. So, Jeffery, I welcome you to join us. Jeffrey's going to say a little bit more. We always like to ask people, Jeffery, as we start, just to tell your story a little bit and how you woke up to this issue. And then Jeffrey's going to show us a short PowerPoint, then we'll dialogue for the balance of the time. But welcome to Humanity Rising.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. And I want to say thank you to my brilliant wife, Susan, for being the catalyst for getting me here so we could have this conversation. I know she was also a guest on your show a while back. And I want to thank you for having the courage to speak about this and to have this week dedicated to this conversation, because a lot of people, even after what we just went through the last 4 years, 5 years now, a lot of people are still hesitant to have this conversation and kind of wanting to just go, well, that was the past, and let's just forget about that and move on and business as usual. And that was a dreadful time for most people, and we can just forget about what happened there. But what happened in the past informs our future, and those previous actions are going to be very important as we're moving forward here. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank my wife for really making all of this happen. So I appreciate that. Okay, so my history. Well, I tell people it's very simple. Um, I am in this for the parents of the vaccine injured children, and that's really what drove me to do this. I wrote my first article in 2014 on the topic of vaccines and autism, and from there, I had parents from all around the world reach out to me and say, keep writing. were parents of vaccine-injured children, and they all told the same story. At some point, I was even using Google Translate to translate in Italian and Spanish to try, and same stories were coming in from all over the world. And they said, keep writing, keep reporting on this. We would like to be as loud as we could be, but we're caregivers now to our children who are, and they all told the same story again of they went in, perfectly healthy child, and the vaccine 24, 48 hours later, their kid never spoke again. And I would look at and I didn't have a horse in this race, so to speak. I just was going by what I saw, and I didn't, to me, that was an injustice of why I was never told this story and why no one's reporting on this story. And then I would see the mainstream media not report on it. The corporate media, I would like to say corporate, because they're no longer mainstream. I believe you and I are mainstream now. I believe the people have grabbed the mainstream moniker, so to speak. So what I saw was just a label thrown around, kind of a label to neutralize a conversation, a very simple label called anti-vaxxer. And there was a lot more to it than that. In fact, the parents that I spoke to were the most pro-vax parents of all of their friends until the injury happened, and then they stopped vaccinating. So these were the parents that took all the vaccines, that were doing all the right things for their children. And it didn't make sense to me. And then I would see explanations like, well, it's just those kids' time. Sometimes something in we don't know what it is, but it's something in their genetics, and just so happens to coincide around the same time they get those vaccines. And I thought, well, that's not very scientific because there's, at this point, it's an epidemic. I think it's 1 in 36 children have autism, and it's not just autism; it's chronic disease as well. And there's a lot of reasons for chronic disease. And I will say that this isn't, we're on the vaccine topic right now, but it's the environment we're bathed in. The environment dictates our genetics in a large way and dictates what genes fire. And that's epigenetics, if you will. And so when I look at the kind of the entire space, you have your thoughts, you have the pollution in the environment. But when it comes to the investigation I did, there's a lot of barriers the body has to protecting the brain, protecting the very intricate, deeper levels of the body, which is the blood. And so directly injecting something directly into the blood and getting it right past all those barriers, you better really make sure that you did the science on this. You better really make sure you did the proper safety studies on this. And this is not what we found. And this is where I pick up the story. I believe it was around 2017. There was a person named Del Bigtree came on the scene, and he started the High Wire and the Informed Consent Action Network. I aligned myself with them, joined that, and together, myself, he, and Aaron Seary, brilliant lawyer, one of the best lawyers, I think, of our generation when it comes to the medical and health space, we move forward on this conversation, and we really look to give true informed consent, because what we saw out there was not happening from a media standpoint, public health standpoint, and also from an academic standpoint. And the doctors I interviewed and listened to, they would say, we can't study these. We don't get the grants. And if we tried to study this and we published a paper, we would lose our jobs at our universities. We would lose our academic tenure. We would lose our ability to make a living. And that's very dangerous, even to this day. That's very dangerous for a lot of doctors and scientists in academia. They work their whole life. They put in 10, 12 years sometimes with advanced schooling, and to touch one topic, one study, because their heart is in it. A lot of people do not do that, and that's human nature. And I'm not a person to judge. Being a whistleblower or a medical whistleblower, to put forth that kind of information, that is a very spiritual journey for someone to take, because you put everything you are on that line for principle. And there's a lot of great people doing that. And that brings us, to the conversation you were talking about of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And again, I always say past actions inform these future behavior. I've never spoken to Kennedy. I've more of, from a journalist standpoint, watched him from a distance. I've reported on him for years. I'm reported on some of the movements he's made and some of the presentations he's done. And he's never wavered with his conversations. So it was very exciting for me to see him appointed to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, because in my career over the last 10 years, I have been against the wind, along with a lot of other people. We spoke with Mary Holland. Tomorrow, you're speaking with Wayne Rohde. All of these people, we've moved against the prevailing winds of government power, and that includes censorship of speech, censorship. Let me look around here for a second because I'm in YouTube. I haven't been in YouTube for a long time, and why? Because the organization that I report for, the Highwire, we were kicked off YouTube, Facebook, and that was our main streaming platforms in 2020 for questioning the origins of the pandemic. And we questioned it. We thought, let's go to some deeper examinations of maybe possibly this thing may have come from a lab. That was enough to get us kicked off, and we never got our channel back. So we had to develop our own platform and stream from a website, which was not cheap. And so that this is kind of the things when I see people like Kennedy, when I see people like Trump, and I'm going to speak more about Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Marty Makary, when I see them being installed as the heads of the FDA, the NIH, the HHS, I don't look for these people to be saviors. These are symbolic appointees that have been put there by the people, in my opinion, put there by this rapid change in ideology and consciousness in the United States. And this is a good thing for me because instead of moving against these winds that are right in your face, government censorship, government basically gaslighting you, telling you there's nothing to worry about, everything's safe and effective. Now you have people that say, let's move beyond that and have a real adult conversation. Let's look at some more of the deeper science that has been there for decades and decades. And so having that wind at our back, people like myself, people like anybody out here in these spaces, all the way down to a parent who's just looking for a different way to heal their child, that the doctor doesn't say, you're crazy, you're a conspiracy theorist, and take this SSRI drug for your child with autism because they're going to be like that for the rest of their life. That's not good enough for a lot of people. So this is where I started my journey. And I think at this point, maybe I'll just run through my PowerPoint here because I want to give a flavor of maybe just a little bit of a deeper resolution of what I'm talking about here in a factual black and white way. So I'm going to share this here. Let's see. PowerPoint. Mm, mm, mm. All right. So that's me. That's the Informed Consent Action Network, the Highwire. Those are the places you can find my work and my research. And at the Informed Consent Action Network, this is our legal arm. So at the Highwire, we have a really interesting back and forth because we're a media arm, an educational arm, but we also have a legal arm that pushes legal actions against the United States, against the regulatory agencies, and forces them to tell the truth under oath. And science, medical science, specifically vaccine science, when it's communicated via public health messaging and vaccine science under oath are two totally different things. And I want to show you just some of the headlines we've created with our Freedom of Information Act requests all the way up to court proceedings. And this is just a smattering of that. CDC failed to produce to support its claim that vaccines given during the first 6 months of life don't cause autism. There's some studies showing that, but when it comes to vaccines, plural, that's just not there, and the CDC could not provide that in court. FDA fails to rebut science reflecting COVID-19 vaccines can modify recipient DNA. We asked them to show us the science that the COVID-19 vaccine was not integrating into your genetic makeup, your genome, and integrating this DNA into you. They couldn't show that. And then a lot of vaccines have aluminum adjuvants. This kind of supercharges the immune system. But unfortunately, the studies for it showing the safety of injecting aluminum into babies is really not there. And we forced the CDC and NIH to come up with these studies because it's happening right now. They're obviously injecting these in the childhood schedule. They were unable to provide a single study to support the safety of this. So this is the kind of stuff we do at the Informed Consent Action Network. I want to give people an idea of vaccine science as we sit here today, because I do think there'll be some changes and there'll be some really expansion on the conversation of what the science around vaccines really has been. So we're in flu season right now. We're coming to the end of it. And when it comes to all of the flu vaccines that are on the recommended schedule for the CDC for adults and children, we look at those and we think, okay, those those have been put on the schedule because they have robust science behind them. They have double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, meaning that a new vaccine is about to come on the market, and the pharmaceutical company says, we tested this against an inert placebo, just basically a saline injection, to see what kind of safety profile it has and efficacy. Well, when we started doing the research at ICANN, we found this. This is what we call the vaccine pyramid scheme. All of the flu vaccines are licensed not based on a placebo-controlled trial. What does that mean? Well, that means they looked at one vaccine that was already licensed and has a side effect profile, there are, when I say side effect or adverse reactions, these are just harms. That's another word for that. So you take a pill, you get a vaccine, there's a list of benefits that it could do for you. There's also a list of harms that it could do for you. And a lot of times people don't know that percentage of what people will be harmed and what people will be helped by these. That's something that science doesn't know with a lot of these things that we just kind of accept in our environment. So when we look at the flu shots, they were comparing one flu shot to the other. So when you do that, you now combine two adverse event profiles, two harm profiles. So if one is harming at a 6% rate of adverse events and the other one's a 6.1% adverse event rate. Well, the new flu shot looks great. It's only 0.01% of adverse events. Oh my God, this thing is... So that's just the flu shots. Now, what about the rest of the vaccines on the CDC schedule? Well, this is what that looks like. So you can see here, it's this intricate pyramid scheme, this intricate web of, we'll test this versus that, and this versus that, but no placebos. And placebos are supposed to be the gold standard of testing for medical interventions. They do it for cancer drugs. They do it for a lot of other drugs. For some reason in vaccines, they don't do that. So it's interesting they don't do that. And what we did at ICANN was the safety profiles as well. So we have the testing, but the safety profiles. So for the hepatitis B, for instance, hepatitis B is the first vaccine given to children, their first day of life. And this is for to prevent in the future drug use, Hep B through intravenous drug use, sexual partners, and if the mother has it, sometimes they can give it to the child, but they can screen the mother beforehand. So, but they give it indiscriminately to all children. So when you look at this, you look at the safety profile. They only looked at safety, injecting those into children in the clinical trials for just a couple days, meaning after a couple days, if something happened, then we're not too concerned about that. We only looked at that window, that safety window, for about 4 or 5 days. So we asked the FDA, this was actually the headline here. We required them in a lawsuit to require clinical trials to assess safety of hepatitis B vaccines. And that's the actual citizen petition. But it says the clinical trials relied upon to license these products only assess safety for up to 5 days after injection. Therefore, these trials did not comply with applicable federal statutory and regulatory requirements necessary to prove they were safe prior to licensure. And that is a lot of the vaccine, quote unquote, safety only looks for these safety windows, a couple days, a week, maybe a month. Afterwards, they're not tracking a lot of times these patients, these kids. In fact, they actually inject them. That's what we saw with the COVID-19 trials, is you had all these people get into the trials and they had this safety window. And then after that safety window was over, they just injected everybody, including the people that were in the test group that didn't get the vaccine because we were in a pandemic. So what you're doing at that point is you're corrupting all of the data because now everyone has the shot. You don't have any true people walking through without a placebo. So that's a big issue. But when you hear this, you think about this and go, how can that be? Well, how do the regulators talk about this? How do the regulatory agencies get away with this? Well, when you hear the regulatory agencies speak in their meetings, in their ACIP meetings, in their FDA meetings, they say, well, we have this great monitoring system to catch any type of adverse reports once it's out in the public. And the public is the fourth phase of testing. So clinical trials go through 3 phases. And then the fourth phase is actually the public, when they start putting these drugs out into the public or these vaccines. So we are the kind of unwilling test subjects. So this is where the informed consent comes in. So they have this thing called the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And this is a system where you go into your doctor's office and your child gets a shot and there's a major reaction and they go, wait a minute, something may have happened here. I think we should report this to the CDC VAERS system. That's what it's called. So that gets reported. Now that relies upon doctors not looking at the parent as they're an anti-vaxxer. That relies upon doctors knowing what a vaccine injury looks like. A lot of them are not educated in that. And so there is a wide range of variability for what gets reported here. So we sent a letter to Health and Human Services a handful of years ago, and we asked them a lot of questions. And one of them was about this VAERS system. And I would go to this question right here. This is the post-licensure surveillance. That's what it's called. Once it's licensed, it's out in the public. And we can see here that because it's a passive system, the CDC actually hired Harvard Pilgrim Medical Center to do a short test and say, you know what, instead of making this passive, instead of relying on the judgment of doctors and the medical community and the parents to be able to actually communicate that to their doctors, let's just automate this whole thing. Anybody gets a shot. If anything happens in their medical records that looks like a vaccine injury in the next 30 to 60 days, it automatically gets reported. Well, in that window, in this test study, it was almost $1 million they spent. It says this: an HHS-funded study by Harvard Medical School tracked reporting to VAERS over a 3-year period at Harvard Pilgrim Health Care involving 715,000 patients and found that fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events are reported. So in other words, it's a broken system. So when we see these VAERS numbers, and you look at the VAERS numbers, and they're very high. We're going to go into those in a second. And you say, oh my God, that's how many injuries there are. It could be 99% more than it already is. So the reporting system's broken. The CDC has made no effort really to change this or fix it. So that is, when we talk about that, bad safety windows during testing and really no monitoring system essentially on the back end. So we go also to the healthcare. When we talk about reforming healthcare, we go to the actual, I would say, the community of the medical community or the atmosphere in hospitals. A lot of hospitals are for profit. And there is something that in 1986, it's called the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act of 1986. You read it through it and it's really great, but there's a couple sentences in there that give medical review boards at the hospital complete immunity to investigate doctors. Now, that sounds great, but as a journalist, I've been speaking to a lot of people, doctors and advocates and activists that say this has been absolutely weaponized to go against doctors that do not toe the orthodox line of mainstream medicine, of public health, also for patient advocacy. So what happens is a doctor will say, hey, you know what? There's a lot of people coming into our emergency room that have had the COVID shot and they're having heart problems. Well, what happens is because of this act, this Healthcare Quality Improvement Act, the hospital can say, you know what, you're the only doctor talking about that, and we're in the middle of a medical emergency. We're going to go ahead and review you. And once that review starts, that doctor can no longer be hired. It's in his record. Their record is no longer be hired anywhere. Their career is over. And that hospital can literally do what they want to them. A lot of times they require psychiatric evaluations. A lot of times they basically just run them out of medicine altogether. And once they're gone, they're out. Their whole career is over. And that also serves as a lesson to anybody else watching. Hey, remember Bob the surgeon? He was great. Well, he can't work as a surgeon anymore. He's working at the local car wash because he lost his job. No one else better say anything. It has an extreme chilling effect. So there's a lot of people right now working to reform this, to give, to take that power away from hospitals and the ability to kind of put the hammer down. So that's also a little side note of this conversation, is there's these mechanisms within the healthcare community, because people may think, well, why aren't doctors speaking up? They can't. They really can't. And so the ones that do, you'll see them speaking out a lot because they've lost their career and they've become full-time activists because they're trying to get the word out. And these are really brave people. So when I watch, having reported, but way before COVID on these conversations, when COVID started coming, I watched this conversation when the vaccine came up. They're going to use an experimental technology that has never been used before, using mRNA to inject into people during an active pandemic. This seems like a really crazy idea with the pharmaceutical companies that we know have had questionable questionable actions in the past, have gotten away with a lot of things. And by the way, if I haven't mentioned this and anybody doesn't know, they have complete liability protection. You can't sue them. And Wayne Rohde, he's the world's expert in that. He's going to talk to you tomorrow about this. He's the author of Vaccine Court. He'll talk about what happens if you or your child, after a vaccine gets an injury, and what happens when you try to seek any type of compensation, remedy, help pay for your medical bills. It's a disaster. And these pharmaceutical companies are completely off the hook. And that was because of an act in 1986. So we're going back to this. So we saw this. 9 vaccine makers signed a safety pledge in a race for COVID-19. They signed this pledge and they say, we promise when we're making this vaccine, we're going to be fully transparent. Well, what happened is our lawyers at ICANN said, well, there's a lot of data here once this vaccine came out that we need to see. We need to see the raw data of your clinical trials. We took them to court, and this is the headlines that were made in Reuters. 55 years, the FDA said, we need 55 years to process this FOIA request, this Freedom of Information Act request, for the data for that. So we actually forced that, and we've had those documents produced on a much faster basis. And those documents have been the base for a lot of researchers to move forward to find out the truth about these COVID vaccines, which we're still trying to find out. We're still understanding this. So remember, these are the headlines when it came out. Anti-vaxxers have a dangerous theory called natural immunity. Now it's going mainstream. Well, it turns out natural immunity was actually better than the vaccine immunity because the vaccine immunity waned right away. Here's my favorite one. It's official. Vaccinated people don't transmit COVID-19. I was one of the first journalists to report that they weren't even testing to see if it stopped transmission. I reported that before it went into arms in the United States in 2020. Now it's mainstream that, of course, it doesn't stop transmission. But, we're in this fear-based pandemic response, and this is what you saw. So I want to play this. There's no sound to this. Hopefully people can see this. This is kind of the idea of the vaccine. So you have this lipid nanoparticle, and inside is the messaging, the messenger RNA. And this lipid nanoparticle moves through your body, and it docks into your cells. It goes into your cells, and that messenger tells it to create the spike protein. Boom, there it comes. Spike protein comes out in your cells, and your immune system goes, hey, what's that? Oh, we should probably take care of that because we don't need that here. That's spike protein, and your immune system neutralizes it. Well, that is a really new vaccine technology. We've never had anything like that before. So the testing really wasn't as robust as we would like to see it before it went into, the majority, I think it was like 90-something percent, 95% people received the first and second vaccine. So a lot of people received that during the pandemic. And there was something called long COVID afterwards, and a lot of people are suffering with that now. And they're finding out this is one of the things. The National Institutes of Health has poured $1 billion into long COVID research with little to show for it. And you go into this article and it says they're really not trying to find out what's wrong with these people. And there's a lot of people that have this. And we're finding now the literature it's just over the last couple of weeks. It was kind of forbidden to talk about a vaccine injury from COVID, the COVID vaccine, because in the clinical trials, they didn't find anybody that was injured. So therefore, it's safe. That's about how far it goes. But a lot of people are saying, look, had the shot and I have like chronic fatigue, or I have some issues. Feel like I'm sick all the time. My immune system's not responding right. Well, what's happening now is the idea of long COVID, which was this idea that you acquired the infection and you just, there's this cycling, you can't shake it, you seem to be sick a lot. That is now merging with the idea of a post-vaccination syndrome. So these two ideas are now aligning to one kind of idea. And we have this study here. This is kind of breaking science, but I just want to put this in here because remember that spike protein, it pops out of your cell. And we were told that reaction only lasts about a week, and the spike protein's cleared from your body and everything's good. Your immune system's trained and you're immune. Well, here's the new science. They found elevated levels of full-length S, that's full-length spike protein, in circulation in the body for 709 days among a subset of people with this post-vaccination syndrome with no evidence of a SARS-CoV-2 infection. So to break that down, these people had no evidence of ever being sick from SARS-CoV-2. And for 709 days after the vaccine that they received, the body is continuing to create this spike protein. Now, there's a lot of great researchers working on this. I'm a journalist, so I'm not going to speculate here, but it shouldn't be happening. So the question is, why is it happening? Is it in our DNA? What is happening here? And that's a lot of questions that we're moving forward with this new science. But this new science is being directed by people that are typically outside the mainstream orthodoxy when it comes to, well, COVID-19 saved the world, the vaccine saved the world. And really, it's great. And let's build upon that success for all other vaccines. Well, people are saying, no, hold on. I'm a researcher, I'm a scientist, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And so that's just a caveat there. But we go back to that VAERS, that Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And on the top left here, that's how many adverse events, that's how many deaths, over 38,000 have been reported to this system after the COVID shot. Now, the CDC will say, well, we don't follow these up. So these are just people's reports. There's no way to really tell that this is from the COVID shot. Okay. Well, let's say it's only 10% of that. Let's say it's only 5% of that. There's a growing movement now to pull this vaccine from the market and say, let's pump the brakes. It may have been rushed out too fast. Let's pull it. Let's have proper studies before this thing moves forward because it looks like it may be harming people. And this isn't, a lot of people say, this is radical. This is anti-vaxxer talk. It's actually not really, because when you look of other drugs and vaccines that have been pulled from the market for far, far less. So even the polio vaccine during the Qatar incident, where they were giving some of the first polio vaccines, they were actually giving live polio to kids. And that was a problem. So there was 10 deaths on that, and they pulled that vaccine. And you go down, you can see Vioxx at the bottom there, 6,000, a little over 6,000 deaths. They pulled Vioxx. That's a very famous one. And then you can see at the bottom, the COVID-19 vaccine, you have, 37, 38,000 deaths, and it's still on the market. So this is one of the things that is a hot button topic. But I want to go to the point where we get into the psychological aspects of it, because it's not just about, it's about informed consent, absolutely, but it's also about mental health, and it's about your resilience, your mental health resilience, and your ability to move forward with your own mind. And during COVID, something else happened besides a vaccine rollout. We had the largest psychological operation on the public in, well, probably my lifetime. And what did that look like? Well, this is what it looked like. This was in the UK, but it happened everywhere. Ministers use covert tactics to keep scared public at home. Another one, government used grossly unethical tactics to scare public into COVID compliance. This was done purposefully. It was done throughout many countries, and this is the kind of stuff that put people into mental health breakdowns and really surged the mental health issues that we're seeing now after the pandemic. And there was only a handful of people at the beginning of the COVID, I'll call it the failed pandemic, really, because what we saw come out of this is just this mental health crisis. There's only a couple people in positions of academia that said, hold on, we actually have the data and the science to show that what you're about to plan with the lockdowns and the masking, this is going to have massive effects if you do a one-size-fits-all in the public. And these are people at the Great Barrington Declaration. These are 3 epidemiologists that signed a pledge in October of 2020, and they said this: as infectious disease epidemiologists and public health scientists, we have grave concerns about the damaging physical and mental health impacts of the prevailing COVID-19 policies. Well, what happened to them? This is what happened to them. At the time, National Institutes of Health Director Francis Collins, he wrote an email to Tony Fauci, and he said this: a proposal, the Great Barrington Declaration, by 3 fringe epidemiologists is making the rounds, basically. And he says there needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of its premises. I don't see anything like that. Is it underway? So when people see the Trumps and the RFK Juniors taking positions of power, I look at that as a positive, a net positive. Will they stumble? Will they do some stuff that people are going to recoil at? Absolutely. Nobody's perfect. But when I see the willful manipulation and the targeting of people that spoke out against these things, like these 3 signatories of the Great Barrington Declaration, they were destroyed. But what's interesting is this is one of the great American stories, is the story of Jay Bhattacharya. He, as we speak right now, he is in hearing for the appointment for National Institute of Health director. The same, he's taking the job of Francis Collins, who tried to neutralize him basically. So this is a beautiful story. Within just a handful of years, he went from being destroyed academically and his career and also in the public to rising up on the backs of the people who supported him to take this position. So, and then this is him right here. These are the other two, Martin Kulldorff and Sunita Gupta. And you can see Trump's NIH pick urges scientific dissent. So he's walking in here saying, you need to question the science. This is my foot forward. I'm going to say, question the science. This is how I'm going to step into this organization. So that is hopeful to me. And then we have this, The Indoctrinated Brain. This is a book by Dr. Michael Nels. I interviewed him for my recent documentary on mental health. And he writes basically the COVID response rewired people's brains towards a fear aspect to receive, to be more compliant to fear-based stimuli. So I mean, his research is great. He's talking about the hypothalamus and the hippocampus, and it really is interesting because he's showing like, okay, we have this COVID-19 response. It scared people into compliance, but it actually changed their brain in a way that they can't critically think about things now moving forward that seem to be, like World War III or, invaders from outer space. Like people can't look at this stuff objectively anymore and analyze this with the critical thinking that's needed to analyze. They kind of go into this just aligned fear response of, well, we should probably just align with what the government's doing. And this is one of the things that people, I think, hopefully a lot of people watching here today have been able to overcome that. But a lot of people in the public space are still walking to this tune. And this is why I think it's going to be really important for us to continue to speak the truth and to have facts and show people these facts and have people make up their own decisions and make up their own ideas. So with that, I'll stop there. I had a quick video, but I don't think we have the audio for that. So I will stop my share here and we'll go back to Mr. Garrison.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Devastating statistics. I mean, it's kind of shocking to take it all in.
Yeah,
Just as make it a little bit more granular, tell us what actually happened to the three doctors who signed that declaration. I mean, after the Fauci received, we got to do something. What happened? What's the rest of that story?
Well, I know Martin Kulldorff lost his job at Harvard. He was a Harvard epidemiologist. Not sure what Professor Gupta, I'm not sure what happened to her. And Jay Bhattacharya, obviously, his story has been in the public. And he was one of the people that once a lot of these internal documents were released, you saw the Biden administration actually directly targeting him by name. So, I mean, he was involved in some legal actions for free speech. So, I mean, these are case studies of what was nice about this, and I say that knowing that the word nice may not be the appropriate way to describe this, but what was interesting about this is in a time past, that type of persecution would have came and went, and they would have been footnotes in history. But because we have the ability for independent journalists and people to investigate and social, the good side of social media for us to actually tell these stories, people held them and didn't let their story die and said this is an injustice and really championed their story and championed them. There was a woman named Bernice Eddy. She was a scientist, a virologist at the National Institutes of Health during the polio vaccine rollout in the 50s. And the vaccine was already out and they were testing the vaccine and they were showing that, wait a minute, this is actually causing polio in some people. And then she also found out it was also causing cancer. She was partly responsible for what's called SV40, which is a cancer component that was found in the earlier polio vaccine. So she was one of these people that is in a footnote of history. She is not really well known by the public, but she was, I mean, this is someone that should have won, the Medal of Freedom or whatever, the highest honor, because she was this whistleblower and she was shut down. She was actually moved to another department in her organization and taken off that because it was just an inconvenient truth at the time because the polio vaccine was supposed to save the world. And she's saying, wait a minute, there's issues with this. Let's hold off on rolling this out, or at least do some better testing. And she never really received her due diligence as a true whistleblower. So we're in a time now where it's important for whistleblowers to come forward because they can actually be supported. And when I say supported, I'm not maybe saying financially because or for their careers, but they can be supported. Their stories will be heard and they'll be told. So when we see the Great Barrington Declaration, it stands as a testament there. That website's still up. It stands as a testament. Almost 1 million people have signed this thing, and the original words are still there of the cautions and the warnings that came true. That came true. And now people, I mean, even the most hardened mainstream people are saying, well, maybe we shouldn't have, they're basically saying the exact same thing the Great Barrington Declaration said. Maybe we shouldn't have locked down so hard. Maybe we shouldn't have kept those schools closed for so long because the kids really suffered. Maybe we shouldn't have kept those nursing homes closed and masked up everybody when the science really wasn't there for masking up for that long for that many people. So this is, I think, the positive in that story.
Yeah. Well, let's back up because you're an investigative journalist and you really care about these issues around informed consent. I'd like to ask you your general analysis of the unfolding events in 2020. And I ask this in the following way. Uh, when the World Health Organization declared the pandemic, I think it was on the 11th of March, 2020. What struck me as a non-medical professional, but just had been hearing about it and so forth, and then all of a sudden, within a very short period of time, virtually every government on earth had transacted lockdowns, isolation, mandates. And what came up for me was less a medical concern than an orchestration of a totalitarian episode to consolidate power over the public using the pandemic, COVID-19, as an occasion.
Mm.
So for me, and I think a lot of people, from the very beginning, this was not a health crisis, but a manufactured constitutional crisis. And that's why the response to the health crisis was so disproportional to any kind of public safety, ethics, or medical science. Wearing a mask, when it was clear, even Fauci said there was no need for masks because masks don't protect you. But then he said later, but it's good for social control because everybody in wearing the mask is kind of buying into this conformity. So would love to have your more political, historical analysis of what took place, what came together to roll this whole thing out.
Yeah, well, I'll say this first of all. When it comes to the response to an a pandemic, infectious disease like that, the WHO and all of the other countries went against their policy. So the policy is
Mhm.
each country. It's almost like you look at like families. Each family is going to do its own, it's going to make its way through life. And when things happen, they're going to face challenges where their strengths are. Well, that's the same way with countries, and that's the same way with WHO's previous response coordination to that.
Exactly.
They would look at countries and go, okay, you're an island. Well, if there's a raging pandemic, there's a different way an island is going to prepare and going to weather this thing than the entire North American continent or China or New Zealand, or each country has its own pandemic preparedness kind of operations because some have more flights coming in, some have more population densities, some have less cities and more rural. These are so varied, and there's a reason why there are teams and there are doctrines for these things. That was all thrown out the window. So that was one of my first questions was why was that all thrown out the window to go full lockdown, which kills economies? to go full lockdown. And one of the biggest things was to withhold early treatment. So as kind of the health journalist looking at this, putting
Exactly.
on that hat, okay, you have a pandemic. It's the worst we've ever seen since the Spanish flu. That's what we kept being told. And we have the little chyron at the bottom of the news saying, okay, this week it's 10,000 people dead. This week is this, and there's these death counters. I mean, just to put people in fear throughout the world on every news station. And we're being told that you can't do anything. In fact, if you're a doctor and you try to do something, you will probably lose your license. And a lot of doctors did. And that's where a lot of the doctors were coming out saying, look, I'm treating people with vitamin D. I'm treating people with inhaled budesonide, and it's opening back up their lungs. And the medical community, literally, the doctrine of the medical community was go home, stay home, because you don't want to be out. Because if you're infectious, you don't want to spread this thing to everyone else. Go home until you can't breathe anymore. And at that point, get to the hospital. And if it's not too busy, we'll put you on a ventilator. And your chances at that point are about 50-50 you'll ever get off the ventilator. That was about how far our medical community had come. That was the established medical paradigm for that. And a lot of doctors are going, this is madness. And we now know that that was all kind of orchestrated in order to make way for the vaccine to come out, for people to take this vaccine. So those were a lot of the questions, and also the idea of it, the origins of it being shut down. Now, I've poured through thousands of internal emails that we've received through FOIA requests of Fauci and Christian Anderson and these epidemiologists throughout the world that were working on this, and even people from Equal Health Alliance like Peter Daszak, and they even their back channels early on were going, look, this kind of looks like it may have been that came from a lab. This kind of looks like there's things that were inserted in here that are not natural. And all of a sudden, all of that kind of just went to the wayside. And these papers came out and said, it's a conspiracy to say this thing came from a lab. We're sure the same people that are questioning it behind closed doors, but in their internal emails that probably never thought they'd see the light of day in public or have people like me read them. They're saying, it's fine. It looks good to me. It looks like it just came out of a natural origin. And you know what? On the back of that, we're going to say this is the first pandemic, but we're going to see a lot more because of climate change. And so they added that conversation in there instead of going, wait a minute, there's risky biosafety issues in most of the labs around the world. And this has been an issue for over a decade. These biosafety level 4 labs are testing pandemic potential pathogens, and they're not doing it in safe ways. There's been breaches. There's been lists of breaches of people doing this, and these accidents. And there's been a lot of people who know that who oversee these things, going, we need better oversight here. We don't need to be doing this type of stuff. And so that whole conversation was completely sidelined. It's gone. It's coming back now because you're seeing scientists still doing these type of tests, and the world is going, no, no, no. So hopefully I mean, that's one of the things with this new administration in the United States. Hopefully we'll pass some type of regulations so these potentials won't happen, especially on American soil or any soil for that matter. Perhaps we can start here with that conversation. But I think you're right with that. There was so many anomalies, and when you step back and you look at what was gained from here. Well, the vaccine industry, who's liability free, just received a complete upgrade to their vaccine technology. Those mRNA vaccines weren't going anywhere before COVID. In fact, they were looked at as like, well, that technology may not really work for public health. Well, now it's the corporations, these pharmaceutical companies are going, I think we should make most of our vaccines mRNA because we don't have to do the testing, and we can just upgrade them with AI, and we can create a new vaccine for a new virus in like a week. And this is great. And we should just streamline this like we did with COVID, because there was proof that we could do that. Just because we can do it, we're going to try it moving forward. So that was that piece of it. And again, what those lockdowns did to people's brains and the mental health of the world is still not a story that's been fully told.
Yeah. 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 And as I understand it, there was really it was like a perfect storm where the corporate interests, the bureaucratic interests, which were aligned by the corporate interests, thanks to Anthony Fauci and the blending of patents and So they had a perfect system where the mouse was guarding the cheese. And then also intelligence interests in terms of dual use and again, the blending of vaccines and biological warfare testing all kind of came together in a perfect storm uh, in a devastating way against the public. And then the overlay was a shutdown on dissent.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
mean,
think,
so if you look at it from the point of view of a preparation for mass social and political control that can be adapted to other situations, this was a really sophisticated manipulation of the global governmental and institutional and media uh, instruments.
absolutely. In fact, there's evidence. Deborah Birx was the woman with the scarf that was standing next to Trump during the early days of the pandemic. And she's the head of the she was put at one of the top positions, the National Security Council, and she is an Army colonel. So she was running the response. There's a lot of evidence that she was running the response, and she was not to be questioned. And she was the one responsible for this hard, heavy-handed lockdown response and the masking. And that was her policies that put forward. And so this was a military response that was put
Exactly.
forward. And on the back of that military response, just to back up what you're saying, we had mostly the Biden administration, because once the vaccine came out, they activated fully this censorship regime. So you had these companies like Facebook, Meta, Twitter, YouTube. They were taking their orders directly from the Biden administration to
Yes,
censor people by name a lot of times. And so speech, I mean, the disinformation kind of conversation and Department of Homeland Security was involved. This was an apparatus that was being set up that has
exactly.
historically dangerous implications. And
Exactly.
we kind of just moved past that by the skin of our teeth because it was in full swing. I mean, there was very little open conversation or dissent from the dominant narrative when it came to the lockdowns, vaccine mandates, masking, all of that. It was really unheard of. So once we had the opening conversation, saw the documents, saw the FOIA requested emails that people were now publishing, and literally just like the CDC sending the Twitter spreadsheets of people to censor or topics to censor, even if it was jokes, they were censoring humor, satire, anything. I mean, this is like the fact that people stood by and watched this happen and can look back now and not see that at being a problem. That's an issue because it was really bad. And I think there's always, seems like there's always going to be some type of line that people can't cross when it comes to conversation. But it's so important having open conversation and open debate. And other countries are still, it's almost like America kind of went through that, and where we have this second birth of free speech going, wait, this is really important to tell the truth. And our government tried to censor us hard, but people in the UK, people in Australia, these are in Germany as well, you're still seeing the government use the same terminologies and the same operation against their
Exactly.
people, saying,
Yeah.
well, that's disinformation. We're going to start with hate speech for this one obvious example. Of course, that's hate speech. But once we get this bill passed, we're going to expand that out to everything and have criminal charges attached to that where you're guilty until proven innocent. I mean, these things are so authoritarian that when people read these bills past the headlines, when you read the bills, it's like, it makes your head spin. Ireland's the
Exactly.
same thing. I mean, in the UK, they're arresting people. They've been doing that for a while now. They're arresting people for memes, for posts on Facebook. The police, armed police, will come to your door, knock on your door, and arrest you for that in cases. So this is moving very fast, and this is where I have hope here. Not to talk about like American exceptionalism because there's a lot of bad stuff that's been happening, but we have this breath of fresh air right now, and it's really up to the people. It's up to people like you and I and people listening here to move this forward. Our leaders will come and go, but it's this idea who's, I say Victor Hugo, his idea is who time has come. And I think it's up to us to take this over the finish line in a meaningful way.
Well, let's turn to that because I want to get your analysis on the current situation. Although I would note that one of the last pardons that President Biden made was to proactively pardon Anthony Fauci. And as soon as I learned that, I thought they knew all along that this was illegal,
Yeah.
or Biden wouldn't be proactively pardoning this guy.
Yeah. It's
And
interesting.
it's so interesting to watch how the political class, the elites, um, take care of their own as necessary. And it was really an ironic closure to the Biden administration. And now Robert Kennedy Jr. is who's the nemesis of Fauci in
Hmm.
many ways, is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So let's talk about this. What in your view, Jeffrey, you're an investigative reporter, you intensely political in your awareness. What what is going on right now in the Trump administration with these confirmations? What political forces are aligning? Because we know that those forces that brought the situation to bear haven't gone away. They're still in place in Europe and most of the rest of the world. But the United States, because of Trump, has somehow broken that. So just talk about that phenomenon and what you discern is actually going on right now in the United States around Trump, Kennedy, and the others that are being brought into play in terms of the overall politics of repression.
Yeah, so I think, well, on the Fauci piece, really quick, one of the overlays that helps me really see things without getting emotional is there's a op I call Blame the Victim. So they use it for a lot of, when I say they, it's used for a lot of different purposes. So for parents with vaccine injured kids, the medical community say, well, it's your fault. It's probably your genetics. It's probably you just pass those on to your kids and they have, autism now. So, and where the parents are like, I just want answers. And so they're blaming the parents. So when I saw the Fauci thing, why did they do that? When you read the articles, it's well, because Trump's an authoritarian and he's going to go after Fauci. So they're blaming when you look at the face value, it's like, well, no, if he didn't do anything, then he shouldn't worry about an investigation.
Exactly.
But the states can still go after him. So that's what I have seen. There's a momentum for that. So I would say, the massiveness that is happening right now, when I say massiveness, the massive movement that's happening right now to pivot, to change the direction of this gigantic ship that has been going for decades in one direction is no small order. So that's when
Mhm.
I continue to say it's great Kennedy's in. I loved his message. I've loved it for over a decade. And he's never wavered from it. I've never seen him behind closed doors or anything say, I really don't believe this. I mean, this is a man of principle. And, this is where I stand with him. And he's up against something big because he has now a bureaucratic system that he is the secretary of at HHS, one of the biggest funded organizations in the United States, billions of dollars he's commanding. And he came in there with a very radical message. So the distance between his messaging and his ability to move that needle within the bureaucracy of the American, in Washington, D.C., that's remains to be seen. Trump had 4 years to kind of get his feet wet and to see which way the wind blew the first time he was president. So now coming back in, obviously you're seeing a lot of movement. You're seeing historical type of moves by Trump because I think he probably was looking and said, all right, I didn't do it right this time. Next time I come in, I'm going to do this, this, and this right away. So Kennedy doesn't have that luxury. Kennedy is coming in kind of green for the most part, being the antithesis of what HHS had been standing for and pushing. Now coming in to try to change that culture. changing culture at that level, with that type of money and influence of pharmaceutical influence as well, and the lobbyists, it's no easy task. So this is a big thing he's trying to do. And I think it's very encouraging for me to see Jay Bhattacharya as NIH head, to see Marty Makary as FDA head, to see these people backfill. I keep using that word, but we need to backfill Kennedy. And I also see states. I see at
Mm.
the state level,
Mhm.
states are doing things that are backfilling Kennedy's message, and they're not doing it because of they're not doing it at the behest of Kennedy. He's not commanding them. It's just, again, it's in the ether. It's an idea
Yeah.
whose time has come. Utah is going to be the first state to take fluoride out of the water. I did a huge investigation on that with Michael Connett. He's the lawyer. He's been working to remove fluoridation with facts. When I talk about lawyers, lawyers are different because they actually have to bring facts to a courtroom to convince the jury, the judge, and they can't just have a convincing argument like a podcaster or an influencer. So Michael Connett did that with fluoride. So you're seeing Florida as well is looking to move towards that direction. So you're seeing this idea of informed consent, of choice around what type of therapies people have, medicines, what type of things get put in their bodies, what's in the food. It's multi-layered, but I see a new era here in the United States, and it in ways I think we need to catch up to Europe in the food we eat because they have a lot less of the chemicals in their food. But when it comes to the medical conversation, there's a new lens. Remember those little kaleidoscope things you flick with your hand or your finger when you're a kid, and it has a whole new lens and a whole new lens. We've been
Yeah.
looking through the lens, and we've been taught to look through the lens of public health and medicine in the United States as kind of a sick paradigm, a disease paradigm. You get a disease, and then we give you pills to manage that disease, but we never really cure anything, and we never really heal you. And in that space, chronic disease, especially among children, has ran rampant. You can see it's almost an exponential rise over the past decades. So we're now looking at this lens. We're beginning to look at this lens through the idea of chronic health. How can we have better health? Not just
Mm.
a disease management paradigm. How do we have better health? What's actually contributing to this chronic disease rise? Can we just remove some of those stimuli to help us heal, to help the body heal? Can we give medical practitioners better tools to heal people? I did a huge conversation with there's a gentleman in Peru named Carlos Tanner. He runs the Ayahuasca Foundation. He's actually my wife knows him well as well, and she introduced me to him. And I interviewed him for a documentary. And he works with ancestral plant medicines, and they're actually doing science there, and they're getting the science around changing PTSD, this post-traumatic stress syndrome in veterans. These are notoriously people that have not had adequate health care. The Veterans Association have just kind of not really treated them that well, and it's one size fits all with the pharmaceutical drugs that they give them that just don't really fix the condition.
Yeah.
And they're finding out these ancestral plant medicines through scientific research and follow up and actual deep analysis is changing their genetics around trauma, which is super interesting. And that alone, I mean, that's an example how an entire industry can be changed from throwing drugs at people to changing their genetics at a
Exactly.
base level with medicine that, I mean, it's natural medicine, but it's big medicine, as they say. So it's not something to play around with. But just those ideas, is there that idea in cancer? I know there's a lot of cancer researchers that say, look, there's things that work, but we can't do them. We can't get them published. We can't get the papers published. We can't get the testing to be done. So can we change the cancer paradigm? Can we change public health? Do we need, I mean, can parents make their own choices about vaccines without public health saying you are mandated to do this and you can't opt out, and your kid will never go to public school if you don't take all 72 shots, and you're out of the game and you can't function in society unless you do that? Is there a better way? I don't know, but I think there is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm a grandfather whose little 1 year old grandson is having to navigate through that thicket. And it's not so easy.
Right.
And I think for me, the bottom line on if you had to cut the Gordian knot of just about all of it. It's to honor informed consent.
Mhm.
Each one of us in the end should have sovereignty over our body, and parents should have sovereignty over their little kids. And taking that away, to me, is the ultimate sacrilege that's taking place. And I know you share that because you're involved with Informed Consent Action Network. So you're doing courageous work, Jeffrey, at the cutting edge of democratic, institutional, constitutional protections of individuals in the 21st century. So I just want to acknowledge your courage and your heroism in the work that you do. It hasn't been easy. It
Yeah.
hasn't been easy. So thank you. I hope you're back on YouTube and Facebook soon.
We'll see. We'll see. I don't know. Fool me once, shame on you. You know how that goes. I don't know if I want to play in their sandbox anymore. Maybe I'll go to Rumble.
That's also true. That's also
Yeah.
true. So that's Jeffery Jaxen, everyone, with the Jaxen Report. He's a documentary filmmaker, an investigative journalist of great courage and integrity. So it's been an honor to have him here. And that'll bring us to a close for today. You're welcome. Jeffrey says he'll join the after chat for a few minutes. The link is in the chat box. You received a link in your Zoom reminders for today. And then tomorrow, we're going to go on to session 4 with Wayne Rohde, who, as Jeffrey said, he's the man on the vaccine court, having his own family destroyed to a significant degree by what happened through the vaccines. And he'll be here sharing his story and what he is doing with his colleagues to make America healthy again. Thank you, Jeffrey.
All
Thank you,
right.
everyone. See you tomorrow. Bye.